Welcome back to Watchbox Studios and Watches Tonight. Thank you, friends, especially those who joined us early in this weird, disembodied chat box that seems to start up before our shows. Tonight, we've got a great program. Tonight, we laugh at Sorry Submariners on Fleabay. We pick two big winners, or at least we predict two big winners for this week's GPHG. We consider graduation watch options between two Rolex options. Which do we choose? Find out. We also peer into our SIHH and Baselworld 2019 crystal ball, and I make the calls. Finally, we examine the best and worst of revival watch brands. I want to emphasize there is no better place than the watchbox.com to buy, trade, and sell your watches. It's where I got mine. We are going to pay you for your participation in our pixels. We are giving away the Tudor Black Rose, the Tudor Heritage Black Bay Black. That is right, the short-lived modern legend. The 79220N will be available to win. I'm going to install the link to the contest page after the show, so if you're watching this recorded, it's going to be in the description box. Let's jump straight into batting practice, warming up with your pitches and my cuts. This week we have a pair of sorry subs that Rolex clearly never intended, and no surprise, this subpar subset is floating detritus on the low tide of eBay. That bay. So let's take a look. We open our account with the Incredible Hulk. And I mean that in the literal sense that this is not a credible Hulk. Rolex green sub, and if the Soviet tank factory dial finish didn't give it away right here and didn't scream run loudly enough, the diamond aspect of this dial should come through for you. Over-polished clasp, that's the first thing I want to warn you about, because this thing at some point was a factory Rolex product, but there's very little of it, of dial or metal, that's remaining. Over-polishing, always a canary in the coal mine, and of course, strap holes on a Hulk is just wrong. It looks weird. It's also inappropriate. Now, chaotic descriptions, these always cause tremors in the confidence. We can go full screen right here. That reference isn't correct for a Hulk. 100 meters is wrong. It says 300 on the dial. That should be the easy part. And then there's the vintage, which is a good solid 20 years short of a real Hulk. So where does that leave us? It leaves us with a bit of a disaster. All I can say is that this is a real money watch. They're not asking tiddlywinks. They're not giving you a colossal discount and selling it as a salvage collection of parts. That's real watch money right there, and I can only advise that you avoid. Good for a laugh, not for your wrist. For that matter, steer clear of all colorful subs with cheeseball diamond dials. We go full screen right here. We've got another one, and from a different seller. Diamond dial ersatz sub Hulks and Smurfs seem to be the thing on eBay. The problem here, well, this particular description makes political campaign ads, and it is that season here in the United States, seem downright honest. What's a classified serial? Again, 100 meters, it says 300 on the dial. That's the easy part. Ceramic bezel? No, that's just a lie. I don't think they're seriously trying to portray this as a modern Rolex, but the fact is they don't seem to understand what they have, so we can't be sure. Avoid at all costs. As ever, help me name and shame the worst of the web. Send your time to run candidates to mondaymailbag@thewatchbox.com. Friends joining in. Guys, thank you for joining me from around the world. I can see R, Romero, Garrett M, Tim H, Steve Bowden, Alex N, Simon Crawford joining us all, and Mark S being joined by Clay DP, Justin Hill, Gorgeous Smurf, and G'day from Australia, Simon. I appreciate you joining me. Now, we can jump into our first question of the night from Keshav S, who asks, "Hi Tim, I've just graduated and I'm looking for my first Rolex as a gift to me from my father for graduation. I've narrowed down my options to the 36mm Datejust with a black dial stick indices and the Explorer 1. So here's the thing. Buying new, I'd have to wait a couple months for the Explorer, but I can get the Datejust now. What are your thoughts?" I would say, first things first, a Rolex is about as grand a graduation watch as you'd want to attempt, and you're on the right track going for steel. Gold would just be wrong for a first watch out of college. And you're also choosing relatively discreet models. A Datejust and Explorer 1 I can see. A Daytona, a Skydweller steel, even if the budget accommodated, would send the wrong message for someone just out of school. So you chose the right kind of watches. I think between the 116-200 with the domed bezel and the 214-270 Explorer 1, you're really choosing between two things, because the price is almost a wash. The Datejust at 6600 costs $50 US more than the Explorer. You're choosing between 36 millimeters with the Datejust and a Cyclops eye with the date, so some functionality, but also a very particular size and appearance. You're choosing between that and its polished bracelet and the cleaner, more iconic dial and 39mm case of the Explorer. So now you've done away with the date here. You've also got a dial that is unarguable. When people talk about a Rolex Explorer, they're really talking about this. Whereas there are many Datejust dials, this is definitive. It also gives you less functionality. So if you like the Cyclops eye, if actually that's a net positive for you and you want a date, then you immediately choose the Datejust. If you don't necessarily like the satin finish, subdued tone of this, or your wrist is smaller and you prefer the 36, I say go in that direction. I would take the Datejust because I like a date, I love the history of the model, and though Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay made the Explorer cool, nevertheless the 1945 Datejust is something like a charter Rolex, along with the GMT, the Daytona, and the Submariner. The Datejust is really the core of the brand, and I'm more of a Churchill, an early Datejust adopter, than a Norgay and Edmund Hillary. That's just my take. Eddie C. asks, hi Tim, with the arrival of the Breitling Preimier, do you believe that Breitling or Tag Heuer is better positioned to take the third slot after Rolex and Omega in the mainstream Big Three brand hierarchy? Okay, I think you really have to say, this being the new Preimier, and that's the Bentley version, very attractive, 42mm in-house caliber. Let's consider the only real rivalry that exists here, which is between the new Premiers and the Tag Heuer Autavia. First problem, this watch right here is priced between $5,300 as seen and $5,450 if it's full steel on a bracelet. It's got a modern caliber, the Heuer 02 70-hour power reserve, automatic 100-meter water resistant vertical clutch, column wheel, all the modern standards, but it's really the only thing like that Tag Heuer has. Yeah, there have been some well-received Carrera and Monza re-editions, but the bottom line is that Breitling with Georges Kern, now that we're starting to see the stuff that he really masterminded, he inherited the Navitimer 8s, he put on a brave face in February, he proved he could launch something quickly, but he mostly inherited that from the old regime. The Preimier is all him, and it's very hot. But here's the thing. Like I said, price disparities. Tag is not competing with the mainstream of the new Breitling product. And Breitling is going to be solidly a Rolex Omega sports watch price point and model alternative. They're going to try to line up perfectly against those rivals. And Georges Kern has the vision and the clarity of thought as well as the backing behind him to do this. Whereas Tag Heuer doesn't know what it wants to be. Does it want to be a boutique brand? Yes. Does it want to be a mall department store brand? Yes. Does it want to sell $15,000 tourbillons? Yes. Does it want to sell $1,500 watches? Yes. Does it want to sell ladies' quartz watches? Yes. Does it want to sell men's mechanical watches? Yes. Does it want to sell dress watches? Yes. Does it want to sell sports watches? Yes. Does it want to sell modern watches? Yes. Does it want to sell tribute watches? Yes. Tag Heuer is too unfocused to take the fight to Breitling. I think Breitling has a cohesion about its upper management, particularly with Fred Mandelbaum advising. Guy Beauvais developed several features that are associated with watch toughness, full balance bridge, silicone hairspring, free sprung balance. How does movement thickness relate to watch toughness? Often it has to do with the size of the wheels. They tend to chip as well as jump the tracks, and they also tend to have very small pivot jewels with the ability to displace too easily if the plates, the jewels, and the wheels are all too thin. Basically, it's like the difference between a giant block of ice and a snowflake. They're made of the same thing, but thickness leads to hardiness. I would also say silicone hairspring doesn't necessarily make a watch tough, except in the anti-magnetic sense. A ferrous hairspring can be tougher from an anti-shatter sense, and that's where ball spring lock comes in. Bump, 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 bump. Jumping back. Comment from Steve Bowden. Sir Edmund Hillary wore a Smith's, Norgay had the Rolex. Both true. Back to the question from Bosley R. All right, Tim, can you give us your picks for this week's GPHG? The Grand Prix de l'Horlogerie de Genève, the Oscars of watchmaking this week. We're going to find out who wins. 17 categories, too many to review here, so I'm just going to pick the big two. The Aiguille d'Or, which is the grand prize, the equivalent of Best Picture, and the Petit Aiguille, which is an award for the best watch of 4,000 Swiss francs or less. So last year's winners, just to recap, the Chopard Full Strike, a remarkably full-throated and technically advanced chiming watch, and the Petit Aiguille was the Tudor Black Bay Chrono. So we actually had a Chopard and a Tudor in both 2017 and 2016 winning, when the Fernand Berthoud chronometer, which was a Chopard LUC or above LUC product, won the Aiguille d'Or, and the Tudor Heritage Blancpain bronze won the Petit Aiguille. So we've seen Chopard and Tudor walk away, which is why even though there's a Tudor in this year's contest, the Blancpain GMT, I'm going to say Tudor doesn't take it this year. Chopard has gracefully withdrawn from nomination after taking it all. So I pick Akrivia's Chronometre Contemporain to win the Aiguille d'Or this year. It's simple, it's classical, and it's apolitical. Everyone loves what Régep is doing, and whereas his previous watches were a bit too baroque and a bit too big, this has a sort of elemental simplicity that inherently appeals to watch folks. And because he was once associated with Patek as an apprentice, but really has no political associations with brands or groups or people, everyone can vote for him without fearing for their futures or jobs. And yes, the voting is highly political. So I predict the Chronometre Contemporain will be his breakthrough product and the Aiguille d'Or. Now, you could say the Petit Aiguille is even more interesting because these are watches most of us might buy and not necessarily buy with lotto winnings. So I think this year it's going to go to the Gorilla Fastback Drift. The Petit Aiguille is going to go to the Gorilla Fastback Drift. This is a 44mm Vaucher-powered wandering hours watch in the tradition of Audemars Piguet and Heuer from Sergio Garcia and Lucas Gop, late of Audemars Piguet. So these guys are both darlings of the industry, and this watch at about 3,000 Swiss francs is a fearsomely impressive Swiss-made, Swiss-powered complication that you can put on your wrist and wear with abandon. So although I would prefer to see the more technically interesting and physically wearable Reservoir Longbridge win, I do think it's going to be the Gorilla. That's just my sense taking the pulse of the industry. We can re-up next week and find out how I did, but those are my calls. Let me know in the description below the video, if you're watching this recorded, what your picks are. Okay, coming up next, Jervis T asks, Jervis, did you write this from Gotham City by any chance? Hi, Tim. Could you look into your crystal ball and give us some 2019 model year predictions? Yes, I can, as a matter of fact. I always focus on a brand's needs economically, or product holes, and anniversaries to act as the horological agent of fortune to you folks out there. So here's where it starts. Patek Philippe, technically this is 180 years of the company. I don't see them making a big deal about it, and here's why. After 2014 with the 175th anniversary, a huge blowout in honor of that anniversary that was held in London, and then a 2017 bash inspired by the London Exposition in New York City. They're pretty much tuckered out. I don't see them throwing a huge gala. That said, we saw 40 years of the Nautilus in 2016 and only a few anniversary models released. The basic 5711, 5712, 5726, they didn't change. We saw in 2017 20 years of the Aquanaut. We saw a new chronograph, but very little changed. We saw an anniversary model and a new chronograph, not much changed. The basic 5167 and 5164 stayed the same. So I think one of those lines could be redesigned this year on the occasion of the 180th anniversary. Don't make a big deal about the brand, but use it as an occasion to refresh one of their bread-winning steel model lines. And I mean Vacheron Overseas Generation 3 type redesign. Totally rethink cases, bracelets, movements, add hacking seconds, that sort of thing. Lange. I suspect we'll see Métier d'Art, we'll see simple watches. We might see a rollout of new versions of the triple split that launched last year, as well as the dial that bowed on the Saxonia thin copper blue. I actually think that will be ported over to other models after the reception it got. But I think the 20th anniversary datograph, the Lumen, that we're going to feature in this show is actually going to be the highlight of 2019 at Lange. 20 years of the datograph, and what a way to market. Richard Mille. 20 years since Richard Mille launched his eponymous brand, and if there's one thing we know about RM, it's that the company never misses an opportunity to hold a party, invite celebrities, take pictures, and launch a limited edition of the RM11. I expect we'll see all four and quite a few others. In fact, there was another anniversary, as 2001 was the first year Richard Mille started actually making watches, but that's another party, another guest list, and another set of special editions. RM is probably going to observe both. More consequently, FP Journe. Now, FP Journe is a company 20 years ago that truly began to transform the industry. Long a rock star engineer and white label guy inside the industry, the first 20 Tourbillon Remontoir subscription watches came out in 1999, and I do think this year we will see a redesigned 4th generation FP Journe Tourbillon. I also think we might have an outside chance of a new resonance, so watch this space. 20 years of FP Journe, consequential, an industry rocking brand, and real anniversary material for new watches to come out of that small house. Seiko. 50 years of Seiko quartz. How can we not see a reedition in honor of what was then a $1,250 watch, the 35 SQ, the first quartz Astron, a timepiece that transformed the industry. That is the before and after watch for the history of the wristwatch, and I do expect we will see a very faithful reedition in the form of the previous 44 GS reeditions, the 1978 quartz diver reeditions, and the 62 MAS reeditions. We're going to see something very close to the original 35 SQ out of Seiko, possibly in gold. And finally, Zenith. 50 years of the El Primero. Guys, this is the only reason Zenith still exists. I believe we're going to see a synthesis of everything that's been coming together over the last 3 years. The new case shapes, the Defy line, the new high beat and Foudroyant style escapements, and the new silicon high beat oscillators. I think we're going to see it all come together in an El Primero 2 movement in a case form born of the new Defy line. Those are my predictions. Tell me how I do after SIHH and Basel 19. Now, viewer wrist shots. Jumping straight in, Ball Y offers a colorful composition with his Rolex 126715 CHNR and Japanese barbecue. You're making me hungry, Ball. Abdul R joins from Ibiza, Spain with Fortis and Sun prior to the German winter. And Simon H turns back the clock and the bezel with his GMT Coke in Jodhpur, India. He's actually in one of those 30-minute offset time zones, so the GMT is going to struggle, but he'll always be. Is gangsta. I never saw it that way, but now that you mention it, makes sense. Revivals! No, not that kind. Watch brand revivals, of course. In the auto industry, dreamers and schemers. There's a graphic that didn't happen. In the auto industry, that was the Blancpain 1735 logo. Now you know. In the auto industry, dreamers and schemers often concoct plans to resurrect hallowed names from the scrap heap of history, often with predictable results. Remember America's well-loved Packard cars? The domain of the rich? The Gilded Age on wheels? Well, be grateful that this revival never reached the road. That's not a Photoshop, guys. They actually built that. It happens with watch brands too, all the time in fact, and often with comic value. Invicta Watch Group claims lineage back to 1837. This from a company whose products resemble characters from the video game BioShock, rather than anything from Invicta's receding Swiss origins. It's uncanny. Big Daddy likes him some Invicta. So now here's how it goes. Revival from obscurity is reality for many brands, because for every Vacheron Constantin 1755 and Jaeger LeCoultre 1833 and Patek Philippe 1839, there are innumerable brands that cannot claim so much as unbroken lineage, to say nothing of comparable vintage. Herewith, a 3-part evaluation of the best, one middling example, and one challenged watch brand revival. We're going to start with the king of them all, A Lange Sohne of Glashütte, Germany, the Saxon watch brand revived, done right. So A Lange Sohne, relaunched in 1990 by Lange family scion Walter Lange and his compatriot Gunter Blumlein, a watch industry veteran. A Lange Sohne is the shining example of what every revival brand wishes it could become in its wildest dreams. The actual A Lange Sohne was founded in 1845. And here's the thing. Today's Glashütte Original is the true unbroken lineage successor to that original ALS. Walter Lange took the name, depending on who you ask, with or without permission from the revived Glashütte Original, but he took the name for his revived Lange company, which was founded in 1990 after the reunification of Germany. Shining quite literally, the revived company launched its first products in 1994 at Dresden Castle in October of that year. Yes, there have been some hand-wringing moments in recent years about resale, overproduction, and discounting, but that's missing the greater picture with A Lange Sohne. By the way, that's the Datograph Lumen. If you haven't already gotten on the wait list, it's too late. That's a bomber watch. But like I said, there's been some hand-wringing in recent years about resale value and discounting and overproduction, but a bunch of guys, consider what they did, a bunch of guys built a qualitative Patek Philippe rival in East Germany on the ashes of communism, and they did it in less than a decade. Think about this. It was barely 5 years from those first Lange models to the Datejust in 1999. It was only 1 decade from those first models until the double split. How crazy is that? They got up and running fast. And Patek Philippe was caught flat-footed by Lange's now legendary finish. In the 1990s, right out of the gate, Patek Philippe had to reconsider everything it was doing and everything that was leaving its factory from Plan-les-Ouates. Moreover, 6 years after the relaunched Lange brand, Richemont was throwing money hand over fist at them to acquire the company. So, today, even simple watches like the 2018 Saxonia Copper Blue are knockouts and collector darlings. Again, small issues with production and value can be overcome with stronger marketing and more constrained production. Just ask pre-2010 Audemars Piguet about that. When was the last time you saw a Royal Oak offshore limited edition dedicated to a driver no one's heard of, right? You can fix problems like that quickly with a focused brand effort. Failed marketing and excess production problems can be sorted, but Lange shocked the watch world like the 1990 Acura NSX shocked Italy and Ferrari into building better supercars, which is why it is the shining example of a revived brand. Now, Blancpain, founded in 1735, out of family control by the 1940s, and dead, literally dead and out of business by the late 1970s. Blancpain is an example of a revived brand that looked circa 1999 as though it would be the Swiss answer to Lange, but its fortunes have stalled, and here's how. Let's start with some preemptive comic relief. In its early revival days, Blancpain liked to boast that it had never built a quartz watch. There it is, in black and white. Which is like me claiming that I never voted for Richard Nixon. Technically true, but not existing at the time does save you from making mistakes. I wasn't born until a decade after Nixon left office, and Blancpain was bankrupt during most of the quartz crisis. So, first, what went right? The 1983 revival of Blancpain owes a great deal to Jacques Piguet of Frédéric Piguet movement fame and Jean-Claude Biver in his first ever stint as a watch industry turnaround artist. Intriguingly, Biver has called the 1983 Blancpain Tripper Calendar Moon phase, the most important single model launch of his career. And that's coming from a guy who's been brought in for turnaround assignments at Omega, Hublot, Tag Heuer, and Zenith, and succeeded at those. So, Piguet brought his powerhouse movement manufacturer to the table and combined it with the Blancpain brand that Biver brought for the equivalent of a few thousand US. Early on, success came quickly. The brand came just in time to exploit the 1980s surge in conspicuous consumption, as well as the post-quartz revival of interest in mechanical watchmaking. Yeah, that was considered cool back in 1983 when Blancpain was flying high again. So, how high did this brand fly? Well, let's back up for a second. The legendary Frédéric Piguet 1185 movement was built for Blancpain right out of the gate. No less than Rolex and Jaeger LeCoultre liberally ripped off design elements from that movement for their own chronographs in the late 90s and early 2000s. And in 1992, Biver and Piguet sold Blancpain to Swatch, whose predecessor company had sold the brand to Biver for 20 grand. They sold the brand back to the predecessor of the Swatch Group, SMH, for 60 million Swiss francs. That's how much Blancpain was thought to be worth in 1992 money. It immediately became the most valuable luxury watch property behind Omega in the SMH company. So, remember, that was before the relaunch of the 50 Fathoms. That was Blancpain without the 50 Fathoms. And at the time, people were cross-shopping Patek Philippe, Vacheron Constantin, and Blancpain without chuckling about the notion. This is a company that was flying high, and the 50 Fathoms was arguably just the icing on the cake and the high watermark of the Blancpain revival when it bowed in 1998. So, it feels like the only thing going right for Blancpain today. Fast forward to the year 2018, 20 years later, and it seems like that original 50 Fathoms of the modern era was the highest peak, the summit. How far is Blancpain falling? Well, let's consider this. Swatch Group acquired Breguet in 1999. The upscale Glasuta Original in 2000. They created Jaquet Droz from nothing in 2001, and they purchased Harry Winston in 2013. At the time of the Breguet acquisition, no less than Nicholas Hayek Sr. said, "This is going to be our flagship in the luxury space." He gave them all the marketing money and all of the R&D. Blancpain suffered, understandably. Omega started marching up market, and it hasn't stopped since the 1990s, which leaves us in a position where today Blancpain is actually building the best watches it's ever created, but Blancpain had the coolest watch at Baselworld 2018, a Flying Tourbillon 144-hour enamel dial, jump hour retrograde, and no one noticed. Great watches, but this is a brand that stuttered out of the gate after huge falls that stretched the limit of cog and spring technology. Many of them can still be found functional in museums, but he and his watchmaking progeny were long dead by the dawn of the 19th century. Previous efforts to revive the brand under his name occurred during the 20th century, but the brand as we know it today launched in 2001 by the Swatch Group as a response to the then red-hot Franck Muller. Remember them? They were big in the 90s. Well, oversized and bombastic, the 2000 era's Jaquet Droz watches were a perfect product for the time, exorbitantly priced, huge and strikingly shaped and detailed. The initial Grand Seconde attempted a fairly faithful wristwatch adaptation of a Jaquet Droz pocket watch into a wristwatch format, but it was the Jaquet Droz sports utility watch that truly captured the spirit of its era and accelerated this brand to 15,000% growth during the period. And what was the spirit of that era? Well, let's review. Endless subprime mortgage approvals, baby boomer Tony Soprano wannabes, and Cadillac Escalade ESV Platinums, themselves driven by Tony Soprano wannabes and financed by subprime mortgage approvals. That was the 2000s in a nutshell. Manuel Emck, later the architect of Romain Jérôme, and all that entails. Do we have our Romain? Avert your eyes, avert your eyes. Well, he was the man at the helm of Jaquet Droz during this period. Today, Jaquet Droz as a brand has sobered up from the 2000s, but I'm not sure where it stands in the Swatch brand hierarchy. The watches are occasionally interesting showcases for arts like paillonné, and they have automata pieces or automaton pieces that offer an interesting take on mechanical watchmaking, but they're few and far between. There's very little coherent messaging, marketing, or outreach to collectors to tie these themes together or cultivate an actual following of people who are loyal to the brand. As of today, the best I can say is that post-2000s Jaquet Droz is an epic pre-owned buy with fantastic product quality. If all you want is to discard the pretense of real history, tradition, and fraternity of a watch collector community, the brand has none of that. But for half its retail price, you can bag a white gold retrograde perpetual calendar, automatic winding with a Grand Faux enamel dial for half its original retail price. Jaquet Droz is the ultimate pre-owned buy, and the watch quality is superb. But as a brand revival, lost in space. That space being the Swiss watch world and the halls of Basel. In other words, you never know how a revival will turn out. You might get a Lange or you might get an Invicta watch monstrosity. And because watches always parallel cars, there was an Invicta auto brand, and yes, it was a revival brand during the 2000s. In fact, the reasonably attractive result of that Invicta revival probably doesn't deserve to be compared to its horological counterpart. For that purpose, I second Homer Simpson. And he suggests this. There is your Invicta automobile. Nailed it, Homer. You can always count on Homer and the Simpsons to get it right. Viewer wrist shots. Steel is real for Bob B and his Tudor Black Bay Steel. Styling with his in-house on full bracelet, and Vivek R keeps our apparent Rolex Tudor theme rolling with his BLNR. Shout out to Josh Thanos who helped him with the purchase. A Golfberg client, thank you for trusting our company. Chris M wins the composition prize for the night with Lincoln keys and hulks of plastic and steel, loving the color and the depth of field. Elton H from Dublin, Ireland breaks the Rolex monopoly on our wrist shots with the Omega Aquaterra, always welcome and beautifully executed. I love the light editing and the filter applied to that particular shot. Send your bests, your pieces on My Pixels Monday mailbag at thewatchbox.com to see your wrist shots right here. Our November watch, remember, I'm going to add the link in the description, so check if you're watching this recorded. The Tudor Black Rose, rarely seen, Coveted, a modern legend, and already a collector's piece. You can win it from us. I'm giving it to you this November. Follow me on Instagram after the fun ends online. Right here on YouTube, we continue on Instagram, Tim_Masso. 2 ways to see me in video form. And of course, comment below in the threads. I love to respond to your thoughts after the show. Thank you. Thanks to my crew. You make the best job in the world possible. Time out, Tim out, and thank you for logging on.